We're live.
Mm.
Over to you, Sukhminder.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Sorry for the delay, technical issues. In terms of today's meeting, can I congratulate councillors for being elected and also congratulate Kemi, who's a new councillor in Camden. So well done, Kemi. In terms of the attendance list, can we agree that I'll give Keith a corrected version of the list, because it appears that Liz Charles and Andrew Scully are on the trade union side on the list, and I'm sure that was a typo.
Apologies.
Yeah, apology. Well, no, that's okay, Keith. Things happen. In terms of apologies for absence, we've got quite a few, but we know that Liz Charles and Andrew Scully are absent and send apologies. And what we have is we have the Acting Chief Executive, Paul Martin, present today, along with Sharon Brown from HR, so welcome. Item 2, urgent matters. I don't think there are any. So we'll go on to item 3, declarations of interest.
None.
I'm assuming none. Okay, great. And item 4, matters to be considered in private. I don't believe there are any. Can we zip straight into item 5, which are the minutes from the previous meeting? So I'll take them page by page, both for accuracy and for agreement. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. On page 7, it does say here, the last bullet point is about halfway up. It says HR to engage unions regarding recruitment. And I don't believe that's happened, but I'm sure it will. Sharon. Is that a nod? Yeah, great. Thank you.
I note the comment.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't actually present at the last meeting, but I picked it up in terms of the minutes. Nothing else on page 7 of the minutes. Page 8. Page 9. Danny, have you got something about the long COVID guidance that's going out to schools?
I have. Sorry, I was getting confused with the numbers there. Apologies. Yes, there's a point here on page 9 about long COVID guidance. As far as I can make out, we have still not seen any of that draft guidance or been involved in it, so we would appreciate seeing that. We have sent our own Unison national guidance to the council for consideration as well, but if we could try to get that sorted, that would be great. We will raise that with Mark Nelson as the head of schools HR, but useful to point out here too.
Okay, great. And under item 9, which is the health and safety update, it says that additional resources consisting of a paid counselling service will be provided and will be updated on this item. I don't know if that has happened. Has the approval been given for additional counselling for people's well-being? Or is it something that we'll take outside of this meeting, Sharon?
Yeah, I'm happy for you to do that. What I would say is that generally, as a rule, when we're asked to provide additional counselling, we have. So we're quite happy to approve more than the 6 sessions that employees currently get.
Yeah, I think this is more in reference to a report that was presented to SLT on mental health and anxiety, in which additional resourcing consisting of paid for counselling would be provided. I think that's in addition, but let's take it outside of this meeting and discuss it.
Okay.
Okay, and the last page, which is mainly to with mandatory vaccinations policy. I think we're all glad that the mandatory vaccinations were revoked by government in terms of the legislation. Just to note here at this meeting, although we'd agreed them, they now fall by the wayside. So at least we've got them on the shelf should we ever require them, but obviously there's no enforcement of those. Right, shall we move on to... Sorry, can we agree with those minutes, please?
Agreed.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the employee side items, please. And lots of paper everywhere. Right. Sorry, for you councillors, can we get an update in terms of the council's savings, the budget, the change in structural review, the stuff that Sue Evans has been dealing with? We know you've been doing some feedback sessions as well. Also, are there any other initiatives or plans going forward? I know I do appreciate the election was only in May, but we do understand you have plans going forward in terms of driving the council for the next 4 years. You have your priorities, etc. But we also appreciate you're not having any additional finances to undertake these endeavours.
Yeah, so in terms of where to start, so obviously we've not yet started next year's budget round, that'll come in due course. And as I'm sure you would have seen from the sort of the internet postings, Ross Brown will be leaving the organisation shortly as our Section 151 officer, and we have appointed an interim successor to the Section 151 role. So obviously we'll obviously have the budget outrun coming up very soon that Steve will be presenting to Cabinet, I believe, tomorrow, actually. And then, of course, we'll get underway with the budget process just as soon as Emily has arrived at the council. I'm sure you're aware, Sue Evans has been leading a piece of work sponsored and led by Paul, which is really a piece of work that came out of the conversations that we had as a new administration about making sure that the values and behaviours, the structure and the delivery of the council was in line with where the administration wanted it to be. And just as we keep on saying to the public in terms of the way that we want to be an open, transparent and inclusive council, that process and structure was designed to do precisely that, which wasn't to start with a preordained view of what the world is and how it should work and therefore what council structure should be, but it started with a dialogue with staff. That has been happening. I think this morning that there was a well-attended all-staff briefing in which my understanding was that some of the outcomes of those conversations were presented and people were given the opportunity for a Q&A session. All of that work is still very much in discovery phase. So it is very much about trying to understand where people want the organisation to go. And it's been really interesting seeing some of that feedback from staff in terms of where they think we are and where we think we should be going. There's going to be a bit of work that's done also with new members, rather all members, but particularly given that about 45% of members are now new, to sort of get an understanding about what their views are as well in the broad scheme of where the council is, with a view that will inform some decisions that we'll take later in the year about sort of target operating models. So at this stage, there are no proposals, there are no consultations formal, but we are sort of in that position of sort of doing discovery. The work's really now well underway to flesh out the council plan for the next year onwards. That's actually been quite an interesting dialogue between members and officers to really ensure that the way that the council prioritises its work to describe the type of hopeful, forward-facing, creative change is really anchored in what the political administration's manifesto told the electorate and that the electorate voted for. Now that will come to Cabinet to full council in July, and we're sort of working through those proposals at the moment. A key requirement, both in terms of the development of the manifesto and also the council plan, was that everything had to be sort of relevant, costed, ambitious, but also deliverable. And of course, there'll be some things in there that we want to stretch the organisation to deliver, but we're never going to set the organisation an unreasonable task that we won't believe that we can deliver, because that's a fool's errand, and that's sort of shooting the political administration in the foot, quite frankly, if we ask it to do something that it's not going to be able to deliver. So those sort of conversations and dialogue is ongoing. And of course, the new chief executive, Tony Clements, will start in 2 weeks' time. And that will be a significant moment for the organisation. Firstly, to thank where's he gone? To thank Paul for the work that he's done over the last 6 months, but also the fact that we'll have a new chief executive who will be leading us and taking some of these conversations forward. So that's a bit of a snapshot.
Okay, well, that's very useful, and thank you for that. We have had a meeting with Sue Evans in terms of the change process, which is quite a productive meeting. And we've agreed to have regular meetings as time goes on. Obviously, things are evolving, so we're eager to be part of this journey, obviously. In terms of the budget, obviously, we've got concerns in terms of the purse strings, in terms of delivering vital services, etc. But, it's obviously, we'd like to thank Paul as well. He's had a steady pair of hands at the top, which has been helpful, and also to thank Ross Brown, because he was very good for Ealing. He's a great Section 151 officer, Director of Finance. So credit goes to him and his officers basically as well. So that's helpful. I'm just wondering, I'm going to open it up. Any comments from anyone? Or should we move to the next item? The next item is Ealing hybrid working guidance. And I believe you've all been sent an email that Mary sent to Paul. It's causing us concerns. The original correspondence that went out, the email that went out, said it had been agreed by the trade unions, but there's been no corrective communication that has gone out to staff to say it hasn't been. I guess what we're asking for is requesting that you withdraw the document, and that's primarily due to the lack of proper and meaningful consultation with us on this. Suggest we have a meeting where we can discuss all of the issues to flesh out what's good, because I appreciate it's difficult having a document which gives guidance for the whole of the organisation. And once you start to have that kind of document, it becomes quite, unfortunately, prescriptive in various places, and one size doesn't fit all. So that's what I'm suggesting, is that we have a meeting to flesh it out. Also, reassurance from yourselves as members that a long-standing good history within Ealing and with the Labour Group and previous administrations is that we've had good collective bargaining and consultation, and we're hoping that you'll give us a commitment that will be honoured going not only now but going forward in the future. And what's happened thus far has only been an error, if I can put it that way. So those are kind of points that I'd like to make. I don't know if anyone else wishes to contribute, but it's really the lack of consultation for me. Danny, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to add to that from our trade union side that we were obviously very disappointed that we saw that email and it contained incorrect information, that we had agreed something that we hadn't seen. And I suppose the point I would make is that we don't need to dwell on it, but I think in order for us to move forward, taking ownership of that would be useful from the council side. An apology would go a long way to us and members. because things like this really do have the ability to severely undermine employer-employee relations. And as Sukhminder has said, and as you all know us here, but that is not what we want to do. That is not going to benefit our members. It's not going to benefit anybody. We don't want misleading information. So I would just urge what Sukhminder has said as well, which is that we want the opportunity to start afresh so that we can genuinely say that we have agreed the guidance and that it gets sent out with us having had our input. We know that we won't always get what we want in policies and documents. We know that, but it's about making sure we do things properly. Thank you.
I think the first thing we need to do is, Sam, if you're still the host, Paul is now back in the waiting room, having lost his internet connection, but he's currently outside. So if we could let him back in, that would be great. Do you want to, is that okay? Can you just acknowledge that, Sam? So we're not speaking to the void.
Sam won't be there, I don't think. I'm going to let him know.
Okay. So
also, I can't see anybody. Everything is black, so I don't know if it's just me.
I'm all right. I can see people.
Yeah, me too, Kemi.
So as we try to get Paul back in the room, because I know that he's going to, because obviously I've spoken with him about this, and I've spoken with Sharon about sort of what happened in terms of the guidance. But I think it's important that he comes in and he's able to have a conversation about it. So I want to say a few things about the whole piece, right? So what we've said and what we said last year is entirely consistent and entirely true. And you've heard me say many, many times that sort of any discussion of home working arrangements that perhaps before COVID were difficult to develop a policy and guidance to encourage home working have been shot out of the water because the way that the world is going to work, particularly for office workers going forward, is completely different. And that is consistent with the approach that we want to take as a council. So there's no reason for people to come into the building for the simple purpose of sitting at their desks, processing emails or doing desk-based activity that you can do at home, right? And all of our working lives have been massively, massively changed to the extent that it's also changing London's wider economy. And it's the thing that underpins our ability as an administration to talk about Ealing's new economy and the working from home work-life balance that enables people to be local, to have the ability to use their local parades, their local communities more so than they've ever done before. And that remains true. There are some things that are best done in an environment in which you can sponsor collaboration and face-to-face communication. One might argue, and I say with a wry smile, one might argue that this meeting, in terms of the way that we kicked it off, is probably a great case study in the fact that if we'd have been face-to-face and in person, we probably wouldn't have spent half an hour figuring out the technology and getting the meeting up and running. And the chief executive wouldn't have lost his internet connection to be in the room, to be able to hear the introduction and some of the questions that you've rightly put to us. Likewise, over the last couple of days, we've been doing quite intensive member and senior officer workshops around council delivery. And I sort of said, look, I want to do them I want to do them face to face and in person, because we're not going to get the quality of the conversation that we're going to be able to have without that serendipitous environment of us being in the same room, that we can see each other, the whites of each other's eyes, our eyeballs, that we can read each other's non-verbal communication and body language and engage in a way that you wouldn't be able to do unless you're in the building or in a physical environment. And that's the principle that we're trying to cascade, which is presence for a purpose, right? We don't want presenteeism. Presenteeism is corrosive and doesn't help. But presence for a purpose is where we need to land. And that's been the consistent guidance from our perspective as members to the culture that we're trying to build in the organisation. Now, there are some things that I think that we need to do to the actual physical built environment to enable that to happen. I look out of a clean window. The windows have finally been cleaned. I don't know if that's the case across all floors, but I definitely know that the 5th floor is done, and I know that the 1st and 2nd floors are done. And I think the 3rd floor is done now as well. We have to think about the use of our building so that it's a more physically inviting space for people to be able to work, and that we're providing people with the meeting space, the breakout space, and the physical environment that can happen. And we will probably at some point in the not too distant future want to talk to you and to want to talk to staff about how we make that happen. those are the baseline principles. Paul, I'll probably bring you in at this stage because my understanding was that you were in dialogue about the change in or in the development of the policy, but there were perhaps a couple of elements or one particular element of the policy that I think is in question here. Paul, do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you very much, Councillor Mason. And my apologies, my internet dropped for what probably was a critical point when I think that colleagues expressed concern about hybrid working guidance. Is that right? I don't want you to have to go over the same ground again, but I surmise that concern was expressed, and I do recognise that. So really what I'd like to say is that we really appreciate the participation involvement of the workforce generally, but particularly the trade unions in helping us to get to a sort of settled position. And I think what we're thinking of here is not just the immediate period after COVID, after the pandemic, but a longer term way of working. That's what we're grasping our way towards, a longer term way of working that's good for the residents of Ealing, good for taxpayers, good for the staff, and works for all of us. And organisations throughout the world, are struggling with this, and so we need to be patient with each other, I think, because we all want to get it right, and we're very determined to get it right along the lines that the leader just described. I mean, there was an error in the way that we finally developed that hybrid guidance. And the error was on our side, on my side, for which I apologise. And as I understand it, what happened was we were developing the policy closely in collaboration with yourselves, with the trade unions. And at the very last iteration, that dialogue on a critical point about the number of days as an approximation, as a guideline, that we would our staff to come in at 2 days a week. That element, as I understand it, didn't form part of the dialogue with yourselves, and obviously that was an error, and I'm sorry that it happened. But I've had dialogue with a number of you, particularly Mary, on email. I appreciate she's not here today, but in an email exchange. And what we're trying to do, I think, is to create a framework that works for both the council and for our colleagues, and is flexible and isn't one size fits all. So I think we're all trying to do the same thing, but we do recognise that our managers look for some firm ground in being able to say to their staff, I do need you to come in for this meeting. I do need you to come in for this purpose. And I think we'd all agree that's a very reasonable thing for managers to request. So, that's our position. I think it's a tremendous thing on the upside that we're agreeing a flexible working policy, which means that the majority of staff, for the majority of their time, can work in an agile way.
We've
lost Paul.
Yeah.
He's frozen,
We
I
lost
think.
him.
I think we saw where he was going.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that was
Yeah.
definitely the crescendo of his contribution, wasn't it?
It was.
Steve, did you want to reflect on sort of what we discussed?
Yeah, Sorry, I wasn't part of the discussions. I know that such discussions are not always conducted for the purposes of concluding an agreement. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And I don't know what the preference was in this case from the union standpoint. But I think certainly from the council standpoint, we want to be able to put out something which gives the kind of consistency of approach that unions have rightly asked for, going back to before COVID. When as leader said, rightly, in this organisation, as in most organisations, there were managers who put unreasonable and untrue objections to the efficacy of home working. But all of that clearly has been shot out of the water. So we want to have a consistency of understanding, both from managers and from the people that they manage. and that an individual would be able, if their manager sought them to come into the office 3, 4, 5 days a week, would quite reasonably be able to ask for justification for such an approach, because that would be at odds with the broad thrust of what we are saying, which is we are saying to people, broadly speaking, expect a world in which you're working from the office around about 2 days a week, taking 1 week with another, depending on the circumstances that prevail within your job in general and at a particular time in that particular job. And we're also saying to managers, these are the reasonable expectations that we as an organisation will have of our people, and we want you to manage your people within those parameters. Now, I sense that, you know, beyond this meeting, we'll be able to find broad agreement. But what I don't think we'll be in a position to do is say, whoops, whoa, sorry everybody, we didn't issue that guidance, you know, forget all about it, and then not have any guidance. I think what we'll need to do is work around the framework that we've got, and for us to do what we need to do to make you as our recognised unions and our workforce understand that we're not trying to pull any fast ones, we're not pulling any tricks, we're not going to make any unreasonable expectations. It's not to your benefit, it's not to our benefit. I mean, you know, as we know, we've said on many of these calls, the building that the leader and I sit in right now, you know, has a short lifespan. We need to build in flexibility, and that flexibility is largely going to be based around working from home for the foreseeable future.
Can I jump in now? Which is a lot of what you've said is quite positive, yeah. And let me be open and honest about this. When you say this is not about presenteeism, yeah, this is if people can do their work from home, and that's, there's no reason for them to be coming into the office apart from team meetings and, you know, collaboration, etc. But I wanted to step back, which is we saw the very initial draft and we gave initial comments on that draft. We have been asking for the document for some time, and you know, it's been evolving, I can imagine, and it went to SLT, and we were expecting a more firmer version to come to us so that we could consult with our branch committee and whatever, and then come back to HR and say, look, these are our suggestions, these are our comments, etc. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. What happened was that the email went out and the trade unions have agreed to this, and it's you know, the scars on my back from people is you know, they're growing in number, and I'm saying, hold on, we didn't agree to this. We've got we sent in initial comments. Here, have a look at the email I sent Liz Charles, which are, these are our initial comments and whatever, because she wanted a quick turnaround because SLT was happening on a Friday. I think I sent them in on a Thursday or a Wednesday, but that's the past. What I'm looking at is seeing if we can sit down, discuss the hybrid working, because I'm trying to be positive and go forward as opposed to going back. Is can we discuss the guidance and look if we can reshape it, because Paul's right, Peter's right, and Steve's right. It's not one size doesn't fit all here. There are some areas, and I've said this to Paul, which is we've got members who have been working day in and day out throughout the pandemic. They've been out, you know, they've been either at Percival House or out in the community, you know, and, you know, they've done a sterling job, as have the people who have had a combination of working from home and working in the office or working with clients, and those that have been working predominantly from home. Everyone's done a really sterling job and needs to be congratulated for all of the work that they've done. And I've seen some of your videos that you put out, and I think that's important that they put those videos out to thank the staff for what they've done, in difficult circumstances during the pandemic. In my eyes, the pandemic isn't really over, and we'll see if there's a next phase of COVID coming down the road, as many of the medical people have pronounced. But let's see what happens there. But I guess what I'm saying is because I don't want to spend the whole evening talking about this. I'm suggesting that we have a meeting next week. Let's see if we can come to some sort of document which is agreeable to all parties and move on. Is I guess where I'm coming from.
So yeah,
What's
Paul.
your
I mean,
reaction to that?
Go for it, Paul. I think Paul.
I was just going to observe, and thank you so much for that very helpful suggestion. And I do think it's really important that we keep talking about this and keep working on it. I don't think the guidance hasn't made an enormous difference, or possibly not even any significant discernible difference to the numbers of people coming into Percival House. So in that sense, I think the established pattern of working is there, and that does suggest, I think, that at the level of services and service managers, colleagues are still pragmatically working through what this means for them. So maybe that's it's a positive that people hopefully are working through solutions in each of their areas.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. I think the issue really is that are they talking to us about it? Because that's one of the requirements. Are they doing their health and safety risk assessments, etc.? And those are the nitty-gritty things that we've got to deal with. There are some, and don't get me wrong here, there are some good managers who are quite pragmatic about the situation. Some have said to me, well, I don't expect to see my staff for, every week. I'll call a team meeting, and, then that's when I'll see people. So it won't be 2 days a week. Some service areas where the face-to-face area is face-to-face is increasing with the client group, it could potentially be more than 2 days a week because of the needs of the service and needs of clients. So it's a bit of a difficult one. It's a jumble, and it's as we all agree, one size doesn't fit all. Sorry, Kemi, you've had your hand up for some time.
I wasn't sure if you can see it because my screen is still black. I can't see anybody, but I can hear everybody, which is good. So, I mean, I just wanted to add to what's been said and acknowledge that, yes, it's just like you said, one size doesn't fit all, but also we need to appreciate and be mindful of the fact that we work together, the council and the trade union. And in the past, when we come to doing guidance and policy, we work together with it and we collectively agree before it goes out. And I think that is what is at the moment the core of this issue, this discussion that we're having, and the suggestion that Suguminda is making, that we do have a discussion to go over it and just make sure we are properly and thoroughly in agreement with it, because as you can appreciate, we do have members that will come to us to discuss this, and we need to be in a better confident position to say, yes, we were involved with this, and this is this, and this is that, and that way we are better in a better position to advise. We currently do have a lot of members coming to us about this already, and Paul, you said something about managers are tuning it and everything, but you will be surprised that there are some managers that are actually saying in team meeting that it's going to be compulsory. So it's not a case of manager tuning it to, they as far as they're concerned, it's compulsory. The 2 days goes. It's not about business need. It's not about being flexible. And this is the concern that we have. Hence the reason why we're saying what we're saying.
If I could just say, I do understand that, and I think that's very fairly put. So thank you.
But whilst I was on mute, Steve sort of raised the point. Danny, you probably want to say it because for the purposes of the meeting, of course, it's not. We can read it into the record, so to speak, but you might want to say it and I can respond to it.
Of course, sorry. So the thing I just put in the chat, you mean? Right, okay, then here we go. YouTube fame awaits. Just clear my throat for this. So I just said that, thank you, Paul, for acknowledging the error that occurred. I think that given the way the guidance went out to all staff and claimed to have been agreed by trade unions when it hadn't been, means that it's prudent for us to meet and discuss the guidance. And I think that's what Sukminda and Kemi have eloquently put. We're not expecting that meeting will be, raising the roof or throwing chairs at each other or anything like that. But I think our members do expect this of us, and we need to be able to meet with you in order to truly work together.
And I think, so what I'd say, yes. I think what you've heard, hopefully, is the commitment that we've got to a permanent way of working that's beyond COVID and beyond the building. It's fundamentally about dignity of work, quality of life, and how we will look at that in the future in the round. This isn't, COVID has forced us to have these conversations, and that's our starting position. Hopefully, I think what you've heard was an error, and that we're very happy to have that meeting to discuss and get back to the discussions that were being had about what that long-term and immediate short-term policy position looks like. So I think we're very happy to see that happen.
Okay, great. Unless anyone's got any other points, shall we move on to item 3, which is schools?
Thank you again. I didn't expect to be back so quickly. Right, thank you, everybody. So I've got some particular points I'd like to raise here, some of which you may be able to answer today and raise with us. Others I know will require us to have further conversations. So that's all grand with me. First of all, you'll be aware that the government published its white paper on education. We did meet to discuss this at the trade union forum. But as an administration, and again, congratulations on all of your elections, we will be expecting you and would appreciate you coming out to firmly state your commitment to local authority education, to schools remaining within that very strong local authority that we have, and getting rid of this ridiculous target, this totally ambiguous, unnecessary target that all schools should become part of multi-academy trusts by 2030. There is no evidence that tells us academies provide better standard of education. There is evidence that tells us local authority schools perform better than academies, and there is a lot of evidence that tells us those in local authority schools are on better terms and conditions of employment. And that's obviously our main emphasis as a trade union. In terms of Ealing's redeployment list, you've heard me discuss this before. This is now my second point, so I should have made that clear. I recently had to contact Ealing's HR department to ask for one of our members, unfortunately, in a school who's been placed at risk of redundancy, to be placed on the redeployment list. And I was told that the redeployment list doesn't exist at the moment because there are no restructures going on within the council corporately. They're not sending out the ROS as they used to, the redeployment opportunity spreadsheet. And I was quite taken aback by that because there are still restructures going on for Ealing Council employees within schools. So I would want to raise that with yourselves and ask you please to look into that. We are in discussions with Mark Nelson in schools HR about making sure that that spreadsheet runs throughout the year, even if we say that the internal vacancies spreadsheet is the redeployment spreadsheet. We just need to make sure those who are placed at risk of redundancy are given every opportunity so that the council makes sure it carries out its obligation to do all it can to avoid compulsory redundancy. Thank you. The third thing I wanted to make you aware of and ask for your comment on, again, maybe not this evening, is that our sister trade union, the NEU, are looking to raise a formal dispute about some issues that they have within schools for their members. And of course, whilst we support our sister trade unions seeking recourse for their members where they're recognised to do so, we are aware that some of what they're asking for relates to support staff, and you'll be aware that they are not formally recognised locally or nationally to collectively bargain for support staff terms and conditions. That is Unison, GMB, and outside of Ealing Unite. And we have had conversations with DNEU's branch secretary on this. What we would urge you to do is, if you get anything formal from the NEU that relates to support staff terms and conditions, please remind them that as an employer, they cannot lodge disputes like that about support staff with yourselves. And just for your record, we're also in discussions with our region about this, who are going to contact the NEU's region. We're hoping that it won't become anything, too big or drastic, but it's really important because we have to protect our members and also those who are thinking of joining a union, that they join the appropriate trade union for them. And I think in time, what we might be asking you to do is to reiterate from the very top down to schools, to school staff, to head teachers, who it is that's recognised to do what within the borough, and we'd appreciate that. So a further conversation with you, Peter, would be most helpful. We'd also quite like to set up a meeting with you to talk about the academisation, which came again from the trade union forum that we had. I know Judith Finley said she was quite keen for us and Julie Lewis to maybe have a discussion to try and work out some of those matters, and also to talk about the school nursing contract that you might have been told about, because we do have some concerns that our members are being asked to carry out more and more duties that are clinical procedures rather than support staff duties, education support staff duties, that is. Thank you. Another point is about job evaluation and the Ealing Schools vacancies website, which we have had to come to you a few times before about, making sure that jobs are properly advertised at the correct rates. We're still seeing that there are some adverts that have gone out as recently as last month, that's May, where the real living wage is not being met. I am meeting with Mark Nelson, as is Mary, to discuss how we work out a better system to make sure this doesn't keep happening, because otherwise you're going to find yourselves in more and more difficulties, not just with us having to raise it here, but with the residents in the borough which you run not earning a decent real living wage. So just to raise that with you as well. Thank you. There's a point that's going next time. And I believe that is everything that we have to say at this point. So any things that you think you can comment on today, I'd appreciate.
Very much so. Sorry, Carol. Well, so believe you me, there's nothing more frustrating than being in the middle of an election campaign, believing that you've put to bed the issue of the council not advertising London living wage, jobs that don't pay the London living wage, and then being in the middle of an election campaign and seeing that the council's advertised a non-London living wage compliant advert. There's nothing more, well, there are lots of things, I should say, there are many, many more things in life that are frustrating than that, but that's a particular gripe that we thought that we put to bed. We'll give you the commitment I gave to you at the last trade union joint and the one that I gave to you before that, which is we believe that we have now solved that. As we have said consistently, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where council resources are being used to do something which is not and undermines the council's policy position. Quite frankly, and I'll be polite to schools when I say this, if you do want to advertise a London living wage, a non-compliant London living wage job, we don't think you should. We unfortunately can't stop you, but we can stop you using the council's recruitment website, and that is the position. And hopefully, a bit of process that's now been changed will enable that to happen.
I'll update you, Peter, when myself and Mark and Mary have met in the next week or two, just to make sure it is, because I do appreciate you re-emphasising that. There was one other point I missed, that I might go to now, if that's okay. It's to do with the living wage. Just ensuring that each year when the real living wage is announced, that gets then passed on to any contracts that you hold. I know it did with our Ealing Schools catering contract, which was really good, but I feel that we still need to try and make sure that's happening, whereas it would be good if we could have a system that's in place to know that's happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I might bring you on the sort of the procurement review, but effectively, you know all the difficulties, and I understand that Unison Conference now knows all the difficulties of the schools catering contract in terms of what happened. I
couldn't help myself. I couldn't help myself.
Like that's totally.
It was by all accounts, it was a stirring speech. Is what I heard. That's how I heard it described.
That's why I heard it described. From the conversations that we've previously had about the nature and way that the school's catering contract is structured, is such that that we're the broker of a whole bunch of schools that come around the table, and you've seen already, as a consequence of us moving to a London Living Wage compliant procurement process, there have been schools that have extracted themselves from that contract. So it has had consequences, but quite frankly, those are consequences that the school governing body and the school leadership teams are going to have to deal with themselves, because we moved to a consistent position, which was making sure, as I've said, very brass tacks like, that dinner ladies are paid a living wage. And quite frankly, it is women who are on lower pay, on more insecure hours, that are the ones that will be punished effectively by a decision by the school to extract themselves from the school's contract. So, we made that decision, and that has consequences. And it's the similar situation to the use of, the council's website. I hope they won't do, but there may be a circumstance in which a school decides they no longer wish to use the council's HR function as a consequence of wanting to pay below the London Living Wage. And I would hope that if a school were caught doing that, that the parents and the teachers, and quite frankly the children as well, the whole community of a school would come together and say, actually, that's not acceptable in the 21st century. So I think that's really, really important. In terms of sort of, we've got a manifesto commitment in terms of the London Living Wage, not just getting us to 200 employers, but also to become a living wage place. We're engaging with the London Living Wage Foundation, not just in terms of the work that they did as a consequence of sort of kicking the tires on where we are on London Living Wage employers, but there is also still going to be more work in procurement to make sure that we still are moving towards the trajectory of making every contract London Living Wage compliant. And obviously you would have seen from the announcement that we made pretty much first thing straight out the door of effectively investing £8 million over the life course of the administration in bringing domiciliary and bringing domiciliary care, but also some of our care placements in line. And work's already started to happen in the West London Alliance to try and get off the ground a London Living Wage compliant dynamic purchasing system that will enable, let's forget if boroughs don't want to do it, then that's on them. But if we can get a coalition of London boroughs together in West London who wants to pay the London Living Wage, then let's create the framework that enables us to do that. So we're not sending money off to the profit margins of care providers, quite frankly, who will take the money and laugh if they can't get everybody to go in together and therefore raise quality and standards.
I was saying, just in practical terms, you mentioned the contracts. Just it has to be built into our contract management. Through the procurement, the whole approach we have to social value. Obviously, you've seen a lot of progress there, but sustaining it's really important, and having it built into the process is fundamental to that. And we know when we reviewed it last year, we found a lot of good practice, but inconsistent practice. And we found in some areas we knew less about what we were doing than we needed to. So I think the first thing we sought to do was bring everything up to a level, and the next thing we have to do is keep it there. So that's a completely fair challenge, Danny.
In terms of sort of the increasing prevalence of support staff having to do what you term sort of, and this is not one that's necessarily come across. This is the first time I'm sort of understanding it, but I'm very happy to understand more. I'd like to understand more, and I suspect that probably also come up through the schools forum. But yeah, definitely, I'm sure you'll meet with Mark with that, not just in that and the London Living Wage. In terms of any dispute, I mean, I did pick up that they are looking to bring a formal dispute. Obviously, when they bring a formal dispute, it becomes a bit more grey. I think we'll say openly, we know and recognise both Unison and the GMB as the recognised trade union for support staff in schools, and that is the formal position of the council. Take the point, actually, Sharon, do you want to talk about just briefly what we do on internal, in the at-risks and internal recruitment, and what do we want to do that? I mean, do we need to figure that one out in terms of the access of school staff to the internal recruitment list that goes around, or what would you say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Danny. I did talk to Mark Nelson, Danny, before this meeting, and he alerted me to the fact that situation had happened. And it is because we haven't been sending out the ROS. But as I understand it now, what we've agreed is that we will send round the internal vacancy list, and that's how we're going to deal with it going forward.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. So I know that Mark copied me into an email to this particular member, and she now has access to that list. Yeah. But I suppose going forward, it would just be useful for yourself or Mark to confirm exactly what the procedure is, because obviously not everybody will be in Unison who's placed at risk of redundancy. So I think probably a memo to head teachers or school administrators to say, this is what you need to do if you have a member who's at risk. Get them to contact the union, but if they're not in one and they want to be given the opportunity to see what's out in the council, this is who they email, or this is you, the employer really should have that responsibility, if that makes sense. So that would be you. So I'm happy to pick that up with you or Mark outside the meeting, though.
Yeah, I'll feed it back to Mark, and then you can obviously have that discussion with him again as well.
And then just on the white paper, the formal position of the administration is consistent with the manifesto pledge that we made, just a few short months ago, which is, we do not believe in academisation of locally maintained schools. They were designed and have been implemented by the coalition government and consecutive Conservative governments as a method through which you take an underperforming school and you make it better. Whilst that, that's fundamentally nonsense, full stop, but also we don't have a problem in Ealing. 97% of our schools are good or outstanding, and the remaining 3% are on trajectories to be good or outstanding by the end of the year. So this notion that somehow by academising Ealing schools that we're somehow going to make them even better than they are. I mean, quite frankly, I'm happy to show the Department for Education around every high school in Southall being an outstanding school. This is, and I sort of vividly recall chastising a particular developer in Southall who was advertising Eton and Harrow as the schools of choice for people who wanted to buy flats in their development, when quite literally every high school in Southall is an outstanding school. So that's the baseline position. The challenge that we're going to have, and it's a very practical challenge, which is if the government insists on a mandate for 2030, it will be a mandate. Now, I think we saw with the attempt by Fielding, if we all remember that, when Fielding had a conversation about trying to academise, but actually the community pretty much rose up in opposition. And it was parents themselves on behalf of their children who said, over our dead bodies. And I would hope and anticipate that the good people of Ealing, of all of our 7 towns, will see any attempt at academising our schools that are good or outstanding as an attempt, and perhaps be as vocal as they were. And that's as good as a government attempt at stealing our schools, quite frankly, as it would be an attempt by any governing body or anybody else for that matter to try and get ahead of whatever it is that we find ourselves being forced to do by government. It probably does mean that we are going to need to develop an insurance policy. But just as there is a electromagnet door lock on my door that has a green box that says press the glass in case of emergency, that is the spirit only in which that conversation will happen, which is we probably need to develop an insurance policy, but we're only ever going to deploy it if we're forced to do. And I don't know about you, but I'm not really sure that the current government and their legislative agenda is that stable. So we might not even be having this conversation in 6 months to a year's time.
I appreciate that, Peter. Thank you. I think the thing to just finish on there from my perspective is I agree that it's a long way off, if it ever is going to happen, and this government hopefully won't be around then. But messages like this do concern people now. You know, they do concern us as unions now and our members now, because, you know, we're all up against it in terms of job security, terms and conditions. So a strong message from yourselves as the leadership, like you've just given us now, and that I'm sure you will continue to give in the months and years ahead, will be very welcome for our members. So thank you.
Well, I hope that gives you as strong as indication as I can possibly give about what the administration's position on that is.
That's great. Thank you for that. That was a really helpful discussion there. Let's move on to item 4, which is London Living Wage implementation in social care, because we're aware that you've announced that you're finding circa £8 million. Which is really helpful and good news. So we'd like to, at some stage, discuss with you the implementation of this, because we're also concerned, as you will be, that the money is going into people's pay packets and not into care home owners' profits. So, you know, that's of real concern to us. So we'd like to, at some stage, have discussions with you in terms of implementation. Would also like to talk to you about Unison's ethical care charter and where we're at, if we've moved forward since our last meeting. And also Danny has sent, on behalf of Unison, a letter to all cabinet members today regarding the joint pay claim which has gone in, which is well deserved, and we're looking for your support on this as well, because as you can appreciate, the cost of living, price of utilities, price of food, inflation biting, and basically giving us a pay cut is really, really difficult now. So I'll leave you to respond, Peter.
Yeah, so in terms of Unison Ethical Care Charter, and the £8 million over the next 4 years in terms of the administration commitment, we don't need to identify it, like it's money that's been found, right? It's been incepted directly into the MTFS. So it's not a question of needing to go elsewhere into the organisation. Like, the money's there, and it'll go into doing precisely what we said it would do, which is to tackle London living wage and care contracts. I think, as I said just in the last bit, that rightly, as you know, and as Unison know in terms of the Ethical Care Charter, but also the London Living Wage Foundation and the Living Wage Foundation, that as you rightly say, you know, we can make as many commitments as we possibly can do, and we can find money in our own budget, but the nature of the way in which commissioning of adult social care happens is that we could well end up giving lots of money to social care providers, either in domiciliary settings or in care home settings or in extra care settings. And quite frankly, the money goes to sort of shareholder dividends and profit margins than it then necessarily goes to being passed on to staff. The scale of some of our commissioning is such, you know that we're a net importer of people who receive adult social care, just because of the scale of the borough and our place sort of within the adult social care market. So some of this stuff is really complex, and it does require loads of local authorities in West London to move together as one. But as I say, those conversations are already happening across the West London Alliance, also particularly with some of the dynamics that have changed around political control and those who were involved in sort of commissioning through the West London Alliance to make some of that happen. So I think we'd be really happy to have that conversation directly with you to give you a better sense as to what we're doing, and you can certainly kick the tires on it. But we are sort of making solid progress. so that we can be in a situation by the end of the life course of the administration that we can absolutely guarantee 100% of every contract is London Living Wage, and that therefore give us the ability to sign the charter, because it's, our understanding from the conversations we've had directly with Unison is such that, there's no point in us signing the charter that we can't adhere to. And the moment that we can sign it and live up to the standards that you set of us will be a really big and important day for the council. In terms of the pay claim, I think it's absolutely fair that Unison and other trade unions are absolutely seeking an equitable pay claim and a pay deal from the NJC, and that's really important. We've obviously made projections in our budget around what we thought the impact might be, and that was certainly before inflation started to hit the rates that inflation is hitting. And whatever comes from the negotiations that happen from NJC, of course, will be what we implement. How we implement that will therefore be a question for our finance colleagues, and making that accommodation will be really important. I mean, I know that you've asked some specific questions of the finance team in terms of what our financial projections are around what's in the baseline, how that will happen. I don't necessarily know that you want to ask them here, but we can certainly cover that ground. But we need to see sort of where the national negotiations get up to. Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
Really, I mean, anybody who tunes in every quarter to hear me talk about the MTFS, the medium-term financial strategy, hears me begin by saying there isn't really a medium-term financial strategy because we have no medium-term knowledge of our income. Therefore, it is a projection which gets more and more speculative the further ahead it goes. So we budget on pay 2 or 3 years ahead around 2.5%, based upon the world as it was at the point that we did that. If pay settlements become more significantly higher than that, then either that's going to be because the council's income stream changes significantly to accommodate that, or because some really, really serious things are going to happen within our budgeting process, or somewhere in between. But those are the realities we face. I mean, it's once upon a time, an individual council could have tried to get around all of this by banging up the rates by a few extra percent or pushing up the council tax. We all know that option doesn't exist for individual authorities anymore. It doesn't exist. So we know way in advance what the maximum in normal circumstances we've got to play with is. So either the government will give us more to play with and we will be able to play with it in terms of pay and other issues, or it won't, in which case we'll have to deal with the consequences. Sorry to sound so cheerful.
Well, thank you for that, Steve. I think in terms of this item, in terms of the London Living Wage implementation, I think it'd be helpful if we meet outside of this meeting in terms of discussing timelines and logistics, because as you say, it's over a 4-year period. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's about the checks and balances. And as we've got members in the various care homes, etc., we could be actually part of that auditing process to ensure that the money is being commuted to the people that it should be going to. And the debacle of the furlough monies that have been taken by the care homes, some care homes, and shipped abroad to overseas accounts. That doesn't happen with the council money. So that's really helpful. Can I suggest that we move on to the next item, which is inequalities and an update, and let's take that with item 7 on the main agenda so we can deal with both. So we're going to have a little bit of a report.
Did
for it, Sharon.
Danny, you've got your hand up, so I was just checking before we move on.
I did have a hand up, but Sukminder doesn't like to let me speak too much. So it's just a quick one. On the NJC pay letter that we've sent to you, I appreciate that you say, you know, you're going to abide by whatever it is that the NJC decide in the end. But just so it's clear for you, you are going to be consulted as employers, and we would really appreciate your very positive input in that, to say that your view is that this is a fair pay claim, as you've just told us, you know, well, you know, an equitable pay claim that we're looking for. And also, again, it wasn't made clear in the letter, but we have, as ever, asked for this to be funded by central government. I'm not holding my breath for it, but it is always part of our pay claim, a very important part, because we know that there isn't a pot of money that you can just all access, you or schools. So that was all it. Thanks, Sharon, for that.
Yeah, and just on that, Danny, like, you know, Steve can attest as I look away from the camera at my inbox to try and find that letter. I don't think I've got it. I don't know if it's gone to other cabinet members.
It came through quite late this afternoon, so we had a limited amount of time to digest it. A lot of detail and some understandable emotion within it, and I'm sure it would have been the subject of discussion and debate at your conference. But yeah, I mean, obviously we take the issues very seriously. Our capacity to pay is directly linked to our capacity to be funded.
Yeah, I'll check that it was sent to you, Peter, but I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah. Okay, so let's deal with inequalities now. And is there an update or not?
Just a couple of things I think that might be useful if I just. So it's just to say that all the staff equality groups now are progressing. They're now holding regular group meetings with members and allies. The focus going forward is to get agreement to the awareness days calendar and develop a plan of key awareness days and events. So you might have recently noticed that we organised an event for the women's group for Women's Week that was on, and the Disability Health and Wellbeing group have invited a number of internal speakers to speak and share at their meetings, and they're planning out some events. And there'll be some events which obviously we did something recently for the LGBT group. Meanwhile, the conversations are ongoing with the remaining groups. And then I was just going to say there was a corporate equalities board on the 7th of June. And that took place, but its form was slightly changed in as much as, and I think some of yourselves were on that call as well. Like, and I think Mary was on it, where DWC were invited in, and the main conversation was to feedback about any feedback they had with staff and everything else, and to focus on the action plans to make sure that we get some action going forward and involving everyone in that process. There's been some additional workshops as well, so that managers could go along to have a look at that and analyse some of the data and what it might mean for their particular services. That's more like the internal piece. I think most people know that Samantha Whittock has been tasked and with being looking after that internal piece. And just to say, externally, Carol Sam has been appointed and taken up post for the external bit around the assistant director of equality and engagement, and she started on Monday the 30th of May, so she's going to probably focus a bit more on the external race commission stuff, but she'll help us to work together with that.
Thank you, Sharon. That was very useful. I didn't actually attend the board, but I'd be very interested in looking at the action plans, and particularly for those in place, because I don't think they're, how can I put it, they're not as advanced as other areas, is what I'm picking up. So and that's rather disappointing, I've got to say. And as an aside, I'd also like to enter into discussions about having positive guidance for menopause, women going through the menopause in employment as well. So certainly like to have some positive guidance coming out and agreed guidance this time. Kerry, do you want to
take
jump
that
in?
forward?
I was gonna say something. I was like, maybe not. I mean, I think I just want to echo what Sukumina said about the plays. I mean, I'm aware about the quality because we do have a bi-monthly meeting that we do together,
Sorry.
where we update each other on what we're doing in each group. And we share that together. But I'm also, like Sukumina said, I'm also aware that in plays we're not really doing that much, and the vice chair, which is Sawa, wanted me to echo in that equality meeting, but I didn't want to say it, but I can say it here. What me to echo in that meeting is that the fact that we've been trying to engage, and we've not received anything back. We've actually sent 2 emails to management, and we've not received anything back, which is not actually quite nice. And I think it'll be nice if something could be started so that that the members know that something is happening, because they're aware that other things are happening everywhere else, but in place.
I think we've made the message. Surely we'll discuss this and talk about a way of clearing the blockages in terms of communications. And we're all striving for the same thing here. You know, we're on the same side here, which is we want to improve the situation drastically. We know it's going to take time, and it's going to be a journey that we're all going to be upon to make that real change. So let's have a discussion outside this meeting.
So if I could just add to that, and thank you very much for those observations. A paper has been published this evening to the Chief Officer Panel, which is a public paper at the Councillor Mason's request, at Leader's request, on the future performance management arrangements of the Chief Executive, so that there's a clear policy in place for the performance management of the post holder, whoever that is. And I know that the intention is that should then sort of cascade through the senior management and into the whole organisation. And the relevance to the diversity agenda is that would form a core part of the targets for the Chief Executive, and therefore for the Chief Executive's top team. And I think that kind of culture will help us embed consistency in our approaches to these cross-cutting issues, of which equalities is such an important one. So it's not a silver bullet, but I think it will help develop a sort of a consistent and corporate approach, so that we don't find that one part of the council is sort of slightly behind other parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I think that's really helpful, because obviously clear lines of accountability and being held to account are very important in the organisation. So I think that was a useful contribution. Thank you. Should we move on to well-being and mental health? I'm not sure if we have an update in terms of proposals, actions, or are we still where we were last?
What I would say is we have put on some additional mental health sessions, and we've involved Mind, Tom Oxley, and the additional counselling that you mentioned, Sukhminder. And there's some training around mental first aiders, which we're trying to progress. So you might have seen some adverts going out for that. And all of this was obviously arranged through some additional funding that we got through from Kerry's area, actually, which was primarily given to us around tackling mental health for front-facing staff. And then I was just going to say, obviously, we continue to promote workplace options, and they've got quite a lot on their website around supporting employees who might be going through difficult periods of time at the moment, particularly around the cost of living and the energy and all those sorts of things. And there's lots of information on the website available to staff and support about what things they might be able to do to help themselves, as it were. And the pod team in HR and OD are exploring a possible eLearn module that staff could use in relation to financial well-being. So I'll give you an update next time about that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Sharon, because we're certainly getting a lot more people coming to us in terms of the financial impact and difficulty. And we're quite fortunate that we've got a welfare section within Unison, which seeks to assist and support people. However, you know, it would be helpful if the council were to consider a bit more help and support, particularly in terms of budgeting and etc. And those that are going into debt, because doing an e-module isn't the same as talking to someone who can give you some practical options in terms of trying to resolve as far as possible people's individual circumstances. So just wanted to highlight that. Okay, let's move on, shall we?
Kemi's got the hand up. So
sorry, Kemi, go ahead.
It's okay. It's okay. I just want to ask one or two questions and then just make a comment. So my question is, I know you said you put it out there, but how does people, how do you signpost people to the well-being, you know, part of things? And I asked that because I'm aware of those that actually, if they're sick, then they know where to go. You know, the maybe the occupational health will tell them what to do, or the management will tell them what to do. But there are a lot of members, because of the COVID, because of working at home, because of everything else that's happened, that have got issue with their well-being and mental state at the moment. And I just wonder if there is any help for them. You know, I know that you say it's on there, but how do they know that they can access it? How do they get encouraged to access it or empowered to access it? Because I do get a lot of comment.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it is actually on OneSpace, but I appreciate that some members don't have access to OneSpace. So I think what we, from an HR perspective, what we try to do is we try to promote it at every conversation virtually, because that's what we need to do. We go along to management meetings and we often talk to managers about it and about how they should promote it and all those sorts of things. And sometimes we involve comms. So if you see any sort of communication that goes out, we try to include links into our wellbeing pages. But it really is word of mouth, really. And it's underused, I'll be honest.
Yeah,
my experience
I can tell you why.
Underused, but the problem is people have got to want to be able to use it. So I know when I've managed to persuade a member of staff or even a manager to use it, they've always given us good feedback.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if there could be a suggestion where management are encouraged to, when they have team meetings, to actually make members of staff aware that that is an alternative for them to use, that is there for them to use, not just when they become sick, completely sick, when then, you know, they'll lose everybody. Because I think that's where it is. When we have team meetings, I actually raise it in the team meeting, not managers raising it. So we need maybe for it to be cascaded down that it's something that they need to use, because there is a lot of people that really need it right now.
Okay, maybe we could look at one communication with all of the facilities on it and the contact points, which can be emailed out to everyone and provided in hard copy for those people that aren't on the email system, if that helps. Yeah. Are you done on this item, Kemi? Yep, great. Thank you. I don't think there's any other business on the trade union side. Danny suggesting posters and leaflets, perhaps, and that sounds like a good suggestion. Let's move back to the main agenda, which is the next item is health and safety update. Is there any health and safety update that we haven't covered already in terms of well-being? Blank faces, that means no. Just to let you know that they were, just for information without disclosing anything, there was an assault at Central Library, and we're eager to find out what happens as a result of the accident investigation and whether or not it was connected with the new customer service points which are in Central Library or not. But it doesn't really matter, because we can't, can't accept members of staff being assaulted in any event. So just to highlight that. And that brings us to the end of the meeting. So can I thank everyone for being very patient, useful conversation, discussion, a way forward in terms of hybrid working, in terms of the meeting, and other meetings to discuss implementation of the London Living Wage and the issues around schools. And can I wish everyone a very good night. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about
Good night.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all. Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
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 Was that okay, Keith?
We're still on. Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I'm just asking Sam to stop it.
Okay.